So another aspect of socialism and communism, as we've talked about before, is struggle. That society is divided between different groups and they have to constantly fight, and this is how you destroy a society. Is something like that happening in the United States? Because we've only been talking about sort of the corporate.
It is. And I'd say this gets into a side of communism that most socialists would not actually agree with. But a lot of them, I think, get pulled along by it, whether they know it or not. The real communists, the people who really know what they're doing, would be promoting this. The ones who really, really know their stuff would be promoting it. This goes into the whole idea of dialectical materialism, right? And the Hegelian idea of conflict leads forward. This gets into the basic idea of what progressivism means in its real sense. Basically, Marx believed that, this wasn't just Marx. Thomas Cole believed in similar things. Remember the paintings, for example, of the Course of Civilizations, where you have the pastoral society, right, the pre-civilization, you have the agrarian society, you have the consummate empire, you have the destruction, and you have the desolation. The course of an empire, of becoming, basically being what Marx would describe as pre-communism, the caveman society, the agrarian society of farmers and so on, the capitalist society where you've reached the consummate empire, people are engaging in trade and so on, right? The destruction, the tyranny, the downfall, socialism, right? The tyranny of society. And then finally the desolation, the destruction of the existing institutions where it has been destroyed. That is the progressive idea.
Isn't that an old concept that is in Buddhism, this sort of karmic cycle? So civilizations rise, they have golden age, and then they fall.
It is, actually. And I'd say it's actually a legitimate view on society. The difference with communism is that they painted the idea of desolation as a glorious thing. And there are different arguments on whether they believed that was real utopia or whether they were doing it out of actual malice towards humanity. This is one, if you get into the real older writings of Marx and the different people around him, this is one of the big things people still debate about, is whether they actually intended to destroy society or whether they actually believed that through the destruction of these institutions in society that something good would be born from it. I would argue that Marx just actually had it out for society, and he just painted this whole illusion to lure people along to destroy everything that they had. And if you read Marx's early writings, he had this kind of dark humor and dark outlook where you could really assume you could really come to the conclusion very easily that's what actually he wanted. And his hatred and malice towards the average person and the way they lived, you can see it in his writing, and you could see very clearly that would be something that he would very likely support. But getting into the whole idea of struggle, this goes into the Hegelian dialectical principle, right? Conflict leads forward, right? Social Darwinism, struggle of the fittest. What is it that survives the state of conflict? Typically the more powerful, the stronger, the faster, so on, right? The smarter. They believe that by creating conflict, the communist man would be the one that would emerge from the ashes of the conflict, from the destruction, right? If you get into early socialist writings, they even had, there's Homo erectus and Homos, all this stuff, Homo sapien. They actually had this, I can't remember the name for it, Homo communistus or something like that.
Oh, wow.
The evolved communist man that would emerge from the ashes of this type of conflict.
This reminds me of
What is this communist man, though?
Well, this goes back into the idea of what we were talking about before, which is, Marx talked about the ruthless criticism of all things. He believed that everything should be criticized, and he didn't believe in constituting something new. Marxism and communism was the idea about tearing down, not building back up. They believed that by creating a man who had been removed from all previously existing institutions, namely things created by God, right? And this gets into Marx's hatred of God, hatred of religions mostly. They believed that the old world, right? This gets into the whole Gnostic roots of these ideas and so on, right?
which we did talk about in the first.
Yeah, so I won't go over too much of that. They believed that basically morals, ethics, society itself, everything was constructed by mankind that had a moral foundation through religion, through belief. And that to perfect society, you needed to create a society built not by belief in old ways and old morals, but by man himself. That society itself should be remade in the image of man rather than in the image of God. And so in order to achieve that, you first need to destroy everything that constituted a society built on belief in faith and religion, which includes everything: morals, ethics,
Family
structures, even construction, even ways of life. That you need to first eliminate all these things from within mankind, and then only from there can man rebuild society in the image of man. That was the more occult side of this.
Okay, so the most highly evolved, Homo communista man is actually a primitive man.
Basically, which is the irony of it.
It reminds me of a Strauss tone poem, also Sprach Zoroastro or something like that.
Well, that's Nietzsche, right?
It was based off of a Nietzsche writing.
Well, the funny thing is Nietzsche actually understood all this stuff. If you read Nietzsche's writings on this stuff, he actually understood. Actually, Nietzsche was really anti-socialist, like really anti-socialist.
Okay.
And if you read, his whole quote on God's, God is dead. If you read the whole quote, it was actually criticism based around what we just discussed, which is, yes, you can destroy these things, but what are you going to be left with? You're going to be left with a humankind that doesn't have morals. And that is a terrifying principle. You're left with people who, all of the ideas we have that maintain even the basic ideas of social cohesion and social stability are based on morals. If you eliminate that, you need to constitute something new. Because what does that leave for humankind? He was talking about this horrible age of atheist nihilism and what it would create. That was the idea. That if you read his whole quote, that's what he was talking about.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. Well, so then how is this affecting American society today?
Well, in American society today, you have a very clear force that is, in fact, trying to, I think, tear down the old world. For example, in China, it was very clear. Mao talked about destroying the four olds, right? Old beliefs, old institutions, old moralities.
Similar things in the Soviet Union.
Same thing in the Soviet Union. And even to the idea that even sexual liberation was mandated in both the Soviet Union and under the Chinese Communist Party. Even who you chose as your life partner was determined by the state during the early stages, which was so destructive to society that they got rid of that policy real quick. But, in the U.S. now, they're even trying to manage through government policy sexual preference. You're not allowed to have certain sexual preferences now, or you're called like an extremist to this point. You're not allowed to say that you believe something is good and something is bad, right? You're not allowed to do it anymore. You can talk about the promotion of, let's say, things that go against traditional values, whether it be entertainment to some extent, whether it be government policies saying, the problem you have is this. If you believe in morals, you believe something is good. And if you believe something is good, you probably believe something is bad. Morals automatically oppose certain behaviors, certain ways of life, certain acts. And I'm not just talking about sexual things, I'm talking about just in general. And if you believe there's a right, you believe there's a wrong. If you believe there's good, you believe there's evil, right? Good and evil in the modern interpretation is not the belief in good and evil itself. Good and evil is interpreted not more on whether, let's say, if you believe in good, you're called evil, because if you believe in good, you believe that something is evil. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Let me explain it a bit differently. The modern morality is an anti-morality, right? And what is considered immoral is to say that what they're doing is immoral. Morality, actually, these days is an abandonment of morality. Anything less than total abandonment of a morality is called discrimination.
I'm thinking of conversations I've had with friends who say the only reason crime exists is because of institutionalized oppression, and the way to eliminate crime and bad things is to give money and funding to downtrodden communities. It's never an issue of a personal moral failing, but it is a result of forces of society.
Yeah, and I mean, you could say that to an extent. You could say it's the society's fault of destroying the moral institutions that restrain certain behaviors.